Good evening, everyone. The bells have chimed. It's 5 o'clock, so can we start the meeting? Thank you for coming and welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. Can I just check, and I've done it myself, all mobile phones are on silent or off. Thank you. The meeting is a public meeting and is being live streamed for the public to view. So in that case, must remember to use the microphone when we're speaking, so that can be picked up by the live stream. And please remember to switch it off after you finish speaking. One of our independent persons, Karen Widdowson, and the senior finance manager, Linda Hunter, have joined us remotely, and they're on the screens in the chamber. And if Karen or Linda wish to speak, please could use the raise hand function, and we'll try and keep an eye on the screens for that. There's no fire test planned for today, so if there is an emergency evacuation, please take instructions from the town hall staff, and the assembly point is in Tudor Square. Can I just move to a quick round of introductions for the benefit of those viewing this webcast, of everybody in the room. I'm Councillor Colin Ross. I'm chair of today's meeting, and if I go around in clockwise direction to my left, please.
I'm David Hollis. I'm the Interim Director of Legal and Governance and the Monitoring Officer.
J. Bell, Democratic Services Officer.
Alison Howard, Independent Co-opted Member.
David Waxman, the other independent person working on standards.
Hi, I'm Councillor Tom Hunt. I'm Councillor for Walkley Ward.
Hi, I'm Councillor Kevin Oxley from Mosby Ward.
Councillor Simon Clement James from Bridgman Greenhill Ward.
Hi, I'm Paul Taylor. I'm the Council's Head of Customer Services.
I'm calling by Grace Paul, Service Delivery Manager, Complaints.
Hayley Clark, Hayley Clark, EY, External Audit.
Dan Spiller, EY, External Audit.
Councillor Gary Weatherall, Shire Green and Brightside Ward.
Councillor Ben Curran, Councillor for Walkley and Deputy Chair of the Committee.
Councillor Andrew Ardent for Broomhill and Shallow.
Jane Wilby, Head of Accounting.
Tony Kirkham, Interim Director of Finance and Commercial Services.
Thank you. And can Linda and then Karen introduce themselves on the screen, and we can just check your connections working that way.
Thank you. Linda Hunter, Senior Finance Manager, Internal Audit and Risk Management.
And Karen Widdowson, Independent Manager.
Okay, thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is apologies for absence. Jay, have we any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chair.
Very good, thank you. Item 3, exclusion of the press and public. There are no items to be from which the press and public are to be excluded today. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare an item of interest in the business on the agenda today? And I'll take silence as no declarations of interest. Thank you. We'll move then to item 5 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, the meeting held on the 19th of January. Are there any items of correction that people have noted? Okay, and are there any matters arising? Just to confirm that at 5.8, that information that was indicated there has been circulated following the meeting. And on 6.9, it was suggested that a review of the Council's Code of Corporate Governance should form part of the peer review that takes place between different local authorities. Linda, I think, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I talked to other core cities, and there isn't a peer review. And I also had correspondence with EY, with external auditors, and they use the documents as part of their planning process. but don't look at it in detail. So what I proposed to David Hollis is that we do an audit next year. We'll either look at the self-assessment solely, or we can actually do a full corporate, a full governance review, and that will include the self-assessment. So it will be covered in next year's audit work. So you will get an independent review of that.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's be included in the work programme. Okay, nothing else on matters arising. Okay, item 6 on the agenda, it's the external audit update. So over to Hayley and Dan, please.
Yes, thank you. So what we've brought to you today is a status update with a view to bringing our more formal audit results report to the next committee in March. It provides a brief overview of where we are in the audit, where we are against some of the key risks that we reported as part of our audit planning report, and a proposed timeline as well. There does remain some risks to that timeline, but what I would say is that both the finance team and ourselves are working incredibly hard to try and work towards that. I'm actually going to hand over to Dan, who's just going to go through some of the detail in the report, and then we're happy to take any questions.
Okay, so I'm going to dive right into my page 5 or page 19 in your pack, just onto the status update. So the top 2 bullet points are the areas of where the most amount of work is still left to be completed for the 21-22 audit. I'll go into a bit more detail when we come to the specific areas of risk around those later on in the report. However, as Hayes pointed out, they're probably the 2 areas where the most risk to completing the timetable for March exists at the moment. The rest of this slide, there are some updates in terms of where we've got to since this report was published for the paper deadline last week. So the work around journals and the work around local government pension scheme has moved on. The journals work is now at review. The local government pension scheme work is just waiting for one final piece of information from officers in relation to one of our queries thereon. The work around starters and leavers from schools payroll providers is still outstanding. However, as I said to the committee in our pre-meeting on Tuesday, I'm encouraged by the fact that Ruth in the finance team has now got somebody that she can actually ring up and badger within the payroll provider to hopefully move that along. And the final piece just on that bullet point around officers' remuneration disclosures, and that is now finished and in review. School bank balances have been agreed to third-party confirmations, so that piece of work is now closed. And then the cash flow statement work we will commence once we've got the final statements tied down, because we don't want to do work on one position that then changes. Conclusion on the issues identified in relation to lodgements is finalised, and keep you on the edge of your seat. We'll give you the outcome of that and the error that's arising in our ISA 260 report in March. And then the rest of the work is just around our finalisation and review. We've also got an update on value for money, so we'll be reporting fully in March, but the sneak preview on that is that we will be giving a clean opinion on the basis of the work that's been completed to date, and we'll provide more in-depth commentary in what we think will be April. I wouldn't like to say that we'll get that done by the end of March. We do have 90 days after signing the opinion to provide that commentary in what is the Auditor's annual report, but we'll be, as you can probably imagine, trying to get that out of the way as soon as the audit's finished, because there's no point hanging around with that. So I imagine that'll be April, but that doesn't need to go to a committee to be signed off. That's just something that we can do, finalise our work and summarise in that, and that provides a more detailed commentary around your value for money arrangements and possibly a couple of recommendations in there as well. And obviously I know that the value for money work is really critical and something that this committee takes very seriously. So that report will come to a later committee, but the timetable is not in line with the statutory audit. Moving on to the overview of the risks. So page 7 is the main 3 risks that we have on every audit. I'll come into more detail on those in March, but the good news is that there's nothing that I feel you really need to hear at this stage and we don't anticipate that any of the other areas of work that we're yet to finish will identify anything further on those 3 risks. Page 8 or page 22 in your pack is where the action happens. So we've got 2 risks on here: infrastructure assets. Now, if you can cast your mind back to September when we outlined in the plan what was going to happen here. Now, it's been as exciting as it gets in the world of audit. Even on Christmas Day, they were announcing statutory instruments in relation to this, and CITFA have amended the code and provided some guidance to do this. Now, there were 3 potential routes which management would have gone with this. The first one would have been to take a limitation of scope on the audit, and that would have ensured that this issue was not one of the risks that we had on the audit and would have been kind of finalised probably before Christmas. And you may hear of some authorities that took that route. The outcome of that would have been a qualified opinion. However, it would have meant that this issue went away for 21-22. Fortunately, that was never on the table for Sheffield City Council, and all it would have done was just deferred the issue into 22-23. So that was never on the table for yourselves. The second approach would have been ensuring that we were able to gain assurance that the assets that were on the balance sheet in respect of infrastructure were code compliant. That is to say that the guidance and the accounting standards that were in place already, your assets were compliant with that. And that was the route that we went down with management and have done a great deal of work to get there. As I say, on Christmas Day, there was a statutory instrument which is put into place and then adopted by CITFA for all other assets that can't be deemed to be code compliant, as it were. And as management have gone through the process on infrastructure assets, they have identified that it's too soon, or in terms of to get that work done for all of the assets that exist within infrastructure disclosures for the council. So the work that we've done has probably been split into 2 parts because of that. So we've gone to great lengths to audit what is there and is code compliant. And as an authority, I would say that you're in probably the best shape, certainly of the authorities that I'm aware of, in terms of infrastructure assets. Now, that's the positive side of the work, and say that's been a great deal of work. And the other assets that have been covered by the statutory instrument and the code amendment, that kind of puts you in line with the rest of the country in terms of those assets, and that covers about 1/6 of the balance. Now, that in itself has been a temporary relief, and that is something that will cover yourselves until 24-25, and say the majority of other authorities are in that position. Now, say that is temporary, and at some point that guidance will change, and CITFA will say what authorities need to do in order to present these assets and be able to present them in more detail and be able to identify those assets in how they are disclosed. So yourselves are very far ahead in that process, and I think over the next year or two, as we will highlight in some recommendations in our ISA 260, there is work to be done, but I think the council are quite clear on what work that needs to be done, and so we'll be in probably a very strong position going forward to have that balance compliant with whatever follows in the code from 24-25. I think I'll stop to take any questions on infrastructure at this stage, just simply because what I might then go on to may distract you from that. So if you've got any questions on infrastructure, I'd probably welcome those now while it's fresh.
Have we got any questions on infrastructure? I think we went into this in depth at the previous meeting, and as you said, because of the PFI contract, we're in a stronger position. And in meetings I've had with you between meetings, those councils that have finished their audit process have had to put in qualified summary of accounts because of this issue. Hopefully ours will be unqualified, because we can get to the bottom of it by the end of this month. So, okay, thank you. Carry on.
Okay, and then, so moving on to the second risk on slide 8, and then also the top risk on page 9. So this is to do with evaluation of property, plant and equipment. Now, the only difference between the risk on slide 8 and the risk on slide 9 is the valuation approach. So we highlight them separately as the work that we will do is different. However, all it relates to is the work of valuing your assets and the assurance that we get on those. So due to the nature of some of the assets, we employ our valuation specialists, EY Real Estate, to assist with the work on those assets. And that work that's gone on longer than we would have anticipated. Some of that is due to issues that have been identified as the work has progressed, and it's taken a lot longer to get to where we need to. That work is back with me now from our valuation specialists. Some of that will take a while to unpack in terms of what the implications of some of the things that they're reporting to me are. And I'd say that is probably the thing that at this stage is the most likely thing to impact on the timetable. That is not something that I would necessarily have brought to your attention in terms of there is a risk to the timetable. However, as we're at this meeting, I think it's appropriate to say that is what is the biggest risk to completing the work at this stage. I'd say I don't think that we're at a stage yet where I'd be saying there is a risk to completing the audit to the timetable that we previously discussed. The other risks on slide 9 or page 23, once again, areas where we'll have things to report in the ISO 260, however, nothing that I would say is important enough to warrant bringing to attention at this meeting as part of this update. The next section is on value for money. So we'll have lots more detail in the ISO 260 and then the auditor's annual report that follows thereafter. But say the headline on this is that we are anticipating a clean opinion, which is obviously what you want to be hearing at this stage from us, and we have nothing to bring to your attention that would impact that. The final piece is the audit timeline. So this sets out where we want it to be, and then the extension into the new year, and our commitment to hitting the March committee for presentation of our audit results report. In terms of what I wanted to set out, that's it. So I'm happy to take questions on the rest of the report, and you've had your opportunity to ask questions on infrastructure assets.
Okay, Angela first.
Thank you so much for the report. I was just wondering, because the valuations of property is every single year is the thing that holds everything up. Is there anything that we as an authority can do in advance, you know, because we're nearly at the 31st of March, so I'm just thinking ahead so that we don't hit the same kind of, is it different things every year? Or so you're just doing a sample or whatever and something else comes up. But is there any recommendation that you could make, which you do, where we get a bit ahead so that we don't get to, you know, nearly a year after the end of the financial year and then we are stuck for...
I'll go first, Dan. You can add after you want. You're right, it is something that comes up every year. And they are slightly different issues every year. And I suppose what I would say is when we do identify a particular issue, finance and the valued property team are very good at going away and looking at that and trying to rectify the following year. I suppose it's slightly your property balance is, you know, there's a lot of assets in there, and obviously we do adopt a sampling technique, so every year we might pick something a little bit different. We do try to pick different things every year. We obviously look at the big stuff each year, but then we try to look at different pockets of assets, and I think that's then why we're then identifying slightly different issues. That there are recommendations we can make, and I think we have done in previous reports and we will do again this year. I suppose it's trying to balance that with, you know, the capacity that the teams have, and therefore what is a realistic recommendation in that regard. So we will put something into our audit results report like we have done previously. We'll make sure we talk to Jane and Tony and the team about it as well, and just make sure there's a little bit of realism in there, but at the same time flagging the risks, the figures that go into the accounts.
So we could get to the point where you've sampled so many things that there's nothing else that we can improve on, and that we'll have a clear run 1 year in the future.
Potentially, yes, and actually some of the items that are coming up, you know, if you look over the last 4 years, yes, this is our 4th year, over the last 4 years, there probably are some trends around sort of groups and portfolios of assets as well, and maybe that might be somewhere to start focusing direction. I know that they have done that previously, but as I say, the sheer volume of assets in any year is probably slightly difficult for them to get through.
Okay, are there any other comments? Simon.
Thank you. Yeah, so full disclosure, I sit on the LGPS audit committee, so I'm glad to see they're telling me the same story they're telling you, so you'll be fine. Yeah, so I'm really just a general question. Obviously, you know, I suppose it's, you know, are things going to get any easier in audit? Is this kind of the new normal? Is this a new timetable? Is this what's going to happen from here on out, or, you know, is there a new dawn?
It's a good question. I think if you look back over the last even 5 years, the requirements are growing. And I don't think that's necessarily going to change unless something changes centrally in terms of what, and it's going to have to come from the accounting standards in the first instance. I suppose the flip side of that you're also not going to be able to stop happening are any changes in requirements. So ESG reporting, not currently relevant to you as an organisation, but it's going to, so it's like sustainability, diversity reporting requirements. Yeah. So not currently required for local government bodies, but I think we can expect it in the not too distant future. You know, there's a lot circling around sort of corporate governance and other side of things, and I suppose it's just how that gets incorporated into local authority reporting. So it is, yeah. So we do need to keep an eye on that. I suppose in terms of the timetable, it's a difficult one. As an organisation, we're currently evaluating, you know, we've all seen the results of the recent PSA contract and some of what that's doing in terms of expanding out into the audit market. I think there is a lot of, there's clearly a lot of catching up that needs to be done. That is quite challenging when the requirements are only ever growing at the same time, and it's not just about capacity within audit firms anymore. I think it's also about capacity within the organisations themselves as well. You know, your requirements are only growing as well. We're certainly looking at how do we invest for the future, and therefore how do we start to close that gap and start to get back on track, but you know, we are way off.
Tom.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. Just a quick question for you both, actually. Hayley, just to come in off the back of your last answer, when you're talking about sort of, you know, the changing audit environment, I suppose, in which you're working in, is when on page 8 it says there's a number of issues relating to both methodology-driven and input-driven errors. Is that broadly errors on our side and errors on your side? And is the methodology-driven errors sort of as a result of the fact that you're operating in a very changing climate as well as us? And then, Dan, a question for you, which is 9th of March is quite soon. What's the deadline between now? What's the point where we'll hit, yes, we're going to go ahead on the 9th of March or not, given that the papers would presumably be coming out a week in advance? Thanks.
So the first point, actually, Dan, I don't know if do you want to take that one? That's the analysis of some of the errors we've identified on the PPE.
Yep, so to answer the question of that, so it'd be unfair to go into too much detail because I've kind of sprung some of this onto Jane as I was walking into the room in terms of working through some of the errors. So I think generally, one of the things that comforts me more about the timetable to complete on the work that we need to do on the PPE is that the big assets we've looked at are fine. It's now unpacking what the impact of the errors that we're finding are, because we've picked representative assets to cover a range of assets. So it's working through that, and that's why we're saying that there's some input driven and some methodology stuff in there. So as an example, one of the items that we found where there was an error, the valuation team had missed out part of the asset. So I would say that that's an input driven issue. And another error that we've identified is that as part of one of the valuations, the method included an internal rent. So part of the business charges rent to the other part of the business. That shouldn't have been included. So that would be an input, that would be a methodology driven thing. So that's the difference in some of the errors that we're identifying. So it's not that everything has just, somebody's not gone through and I don't know, quality assured the valuations and things have been missed, nor is it that they're all to do with a fundamental issue in the way that the valuations team are doing it. There are different parts of the errors, and that's why it's quite difficult to unpack at this stage, because there's lots of little things that have caused us the problems.
And then your other 2 points, I suppose you're right, 9th of March isn't far off, but we've got another 2 weeks, and as you know, you heard Dan explain, a number of the things that we were showing as outstanding in this report have actually moved on quite significantly. So actually, the report that we'll be bringing to you will be much further completed than what it would have been if we'd brought it to you at this stage. I think it's fair to say that there are likely to be some areas that are still outstanding at that time. And then we can obviously give you an update at the committee on the 9th of March. One of the conversations we've had, though, is actually one of the reasons we want to sign in March is if we're unable to do so, the triennial for the local government pension scheme is released because it's a 2022 year-end triennial. The estimate then needs updating for the financial statements. So that's one of the risks that we need to be aware of, that if we are unable to get it signed in March, that's going to be a further piece of work that needs to happen to then enable you to approve and then us to effectively sign the financial statements opinion. As Dan's highlighted, there is some risk to that, and we're just going to have to monitor it really, really closely. There was a conversation between us, Chair, actually around potential delegation at the 9th of March and whether that would be possible, given that you would have had our reporting subject to no significant changes. And I don't know if that's something that you wanted to discuss amongst yourselves today or on the 9th.
Did you want to come back on that?
I just wanted to clarify on the triennial. Is that triennial valuation of the local government pension scheme?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, the point is that could impact looking retrospectively at the accounts. So it's in everybody's interest to get this sorted out. Hayley referred to a conversation we had because I'm keen to get this sorted while we're still in the next financial year rather than going into April, the financial year afterwards. That seems a bit long-winded, and there's all sorts of delegations. And I don't know whether, David, you want to comment, because hopefully everything will be signed, sealed and delivered for the 9th of March. However, it is probable, I'd say, that there are some small items that need finalising, and so we may be in a position of needing to find a method where we can sign the accounts off by the end of March. Now, what is legally possible in that instance?
I'm going to give you a lawyer's answer if it depends what they are. Depending where we get to, it may be that substantially they can be signed off by the committee and there's just a few administrative things to resolve over. If there are substantive matters that still need approval, then that's likely to need a delegation, and under the current system that would have to be a delegation to an officer, because there can't be delegations to single members, but that would be in consultation. So it's going to be, let's see what we've got when we get there on the 9th of March.
Okay, so that is the answer. We don't we don't know quite at the moment what we can do. I suppose if necessary to get it all done, could we have an urgency meeting of this committee if that proved absolutely necessary to get it done by the end of March?
Sorry, yes,
Yeah.
that is another option.
Yeah. Okay, well, hopefully that won't be necessary, but we'll decide. Well, basically, we need to have a look at the report in advance of the 9th of March and actually decide what our options are, and then come to a decision about what we do as a committee on the 9th of March. I'm getting nods at that. Happy enough with that. Okay, thank you very much. And there's no recommendations with this, so just to note the contents of this report and look forward to seeing you on the 9th of March. Thank you. Right, moving on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the annual standards report. And David, you're going to lead on this one.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the 6th Standards Annual Report of the merged Audit and Standards Committee, and it covers a 12-month period from January 2022 to December 2022. It reflects the changes to the standards regime that were introduced in July 2012 by the Localism Act, and although it's no longer a statutory requirement to have a standards committee, full council have retained a committee to deal with complaints and adopted a new members' code of conduct and a procedure for dealing with the standards complaints, and that will be the subject of the next item on the agenda. We have 2 independent persons required by the Localism Act, and they're appointed jointly with Barnsley Metropolitan Borough Council to assist the monitoring officer in dealing with standards complaints. The Section 2 sets out the standards-specific role of the Audit and Standards Committee. Section 3 sets out the membership of the committee, which is 7 members, proportionally applied, and a maximum of 3 non-voting co-opted members. The Section 5 deals with the complaints that came through the standards regime in that last year, and the table in 5.1 sets those out. There were a total of 14 that came in, none required referring to a consideration subcommittee, or either with or without an investigation. Of those 14, 4 were to take no action because it was determined there was no breach. 1 was withdrawn. It says withdrawn or invalid, but that was actually withdrawn. 7 were rejected, and I think because of that number, it's probably worth a breakdown on what those were. 1 was rejected because it was a repeat of one that had already been put in. 4 were deemed not to raise standards issues because either in 3 cases it was clear that the member was not acting in capacity of a councillor at the time of the alleged action, and the other one was because there was no action attributed to a member that came in as a general complaint against the council. It named a member, but there was no action attributable to that member. 1 was deemed to be a misuse of the process, and 1 was diverted into a different process of the council. So that's the breakdown of the 7 that were rejected. 2 of those that went through were dealt with through an informal resolution. The council must appoint at least 1 independent person. Their role is advisory, and Alison is here as that independent person. We undertook a joint recruitment process with Barnsley to have the independent persons involved in the standards, and David was reappointed. David had been an independent person for a number of years, and it was considered whether that meant he could retain that independence. That matter was put before this committee, and it was determined that it was appropriate that he be reappointed, and we're grateful for his continuing involvement. And Karen was also appointed, and we're grateful for her contributions as well. Section 8 of the report sets out the training and development for councillors, and Section 9, the policy and corporate issues that have been considered by the committee. I don't know if there's any particular questions that arise out of the report.
Angela.
Thanks, David. Thank you very much for the report. Just a point of clarification. Normally, you know, when we have the complaints, I mean, first of all, these are much less than we normally get in a 12-month period, so that's good. But we normally get the parish councils as well, and then they get split. That's my recollection from previous years, and I wonder why that is.
There haven't been any parish council complaints this year. Or last year.
So civil war has not broken out on parish council.
Touching wood.
Yeah. Any other questions? Karen.
Thank you. I just have a query. On page 38, you set out the complaints table, and I wondered if it would be helpful if we've got this 2022 year, and I wondered if it would be useful to have the 2021 year so that we can do a comparison, and possibly it picks up any trends. I don't know if that's possible, but I think I'll just mention it.
Yes, I think that would be possible, and it's probably not a bad idea, so we can see those trends in the numbers. I think those who were here have noted it's gone down, but it would be useful to have that expressly stated in the report.
I've just got one question. Can you just clarify the case that was diverted? What was it diverted into?
That was diverted into the officer member protocol.
Okay. Thank you. So, thank you for that. Recommendations are to comment on the annual report and approve the report for submission to full council. Is that agreed? Thank you. And then we move on to item 8 on the agenda, which is review of the members' code of conduct and complaints. Now, this is where we've got an extra one that's been tabled. Where is that? Where it's? I got that right. Where it's been highlighted in red, where there have been changes to make it easier to track those. So you should all have that on your desks. Okay, and this is you again, David.
It's me again, Chair. Thank you. So the latest version of the procedure for dealing with standards complaints was approved by full council in November 22. It forms part of the monitoring officer protocol. While standards procedure is dealt with, it's largely based upon the LGA model code that was they put out in December 2020. There have been extensive revisions in line with best practice recommendations. Detailed changes are contained in the background reports to the Audit and Standards Committee in January 2019, October 2019 and July 2020. Only minor changes have been made more recently to reflect changes in myself as monitoring officer and Karen as the independent person. Minor amendments were agreed at full council in November 2022 and will be subsequently updated in the council's constitution. 2.6 deals with the matter that we've mentioned in the previous report, which is the appointment of the independent persons. We're not proposing any revisions to the code of conduct, but some minor changes to the procedure to keep track for clarity, but also with current practice. And Chair, yes, you're right. The appendix was the right appendix, but it didn't show the changes clearly. So the further one you've got, and if I just go through those changes, first one is on page 7, paragraph 5.4. Just for clarification there, it says that the member will be informed in writing that a complaint has been made about them either within 5 working days of receipt of the complainant or 5 working days of receiving any clarification which the monitoring officer has sought under paragraph 5.2, which is where there might be clarification from the complainant. Further down there, it's also clarified that members will not be notified of complaints that are rejected under paragraph 5.3. That is the working practice at the current, that where they are rejected, that members are not told of that. 5.5 is amended to say that if a complaint is accepted, then it details who that complaint is sent to also adds in that it can be sent to the Chief Executive if it's considered appropriate. And there's a similar change to 6.4, which is upon the outcome, again, where considered appropriate to the Chief Executive. So those are more procedural changes than substantive. Back to the report, it also highlights a case that the LGO considered, which were, in reporting on it, the Ombudsman asked to be brought to the attention of those dealing with standards, and in particular standards committees. It was an interesting case. I don't think it's one that we have fallen foul of. We're always mindful of the Article 10 rights, in particular free speech and those of political, and we try not to interfere with those where that they are done in accordance with the standards regime and where the conduct doesn't step over the mark for what the code requires, but it does give latitude to expression of political thought. Sorry, Chair, I don't know if there's any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions on this? No, it's very comprehensive then. So the recommendations are that we comment on the proposal revisions, if any, with the inclusion of any additional revisions arising from the meeting, which there aren't any, recommends to full council the adoption of the revised procedure and that the constitution is amended accordingly, and refers the revised procedure to the parish and town councils for consideration and adoption. Can we agree those three recommendations? Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay. So now that's item 9 on the agenda, which is the findings of the recommendation of the annual complaints and Ombudsman Report from the 17th of November 2022. And this is Paul and Colleen. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Following our attendance at this committee meeting in November 22, there were a number of recommendations that were issued to the Chief Executive, which were warmly welcomed, positively received. And we're here really to discuss the actions that have been taken since that date, to reassure you that we will improve accountability, responsiveness, and the accurate recording of feedback and complaints, so that we can and will enhance our reputation as a caring organisation that listens to its population. So I have the presentation. I'm not sure whether... thank you. This hopefully just gives you a summary of the action plan and the actions that we've taken since that meeting, to reassure you of our direction of travel, as it were. So on the first slide are the recommendations, slide 2 are the recommendations, and we thank you really for those recommendations and the support, because that's really had a positive effect within the organisation and were warmly received by the senior leadership board at their recent performance and delivery meeting, which has really been received positively within the organisation. Tonight we'll explain the improvement plan, which is aligned to these recommendations, to give you assurance of what work is being done within the organisation to address these issues. So if we just move on to the next slide. Since the last meeting, I just wanted to outline what we've been doing in respects to this. And the first thing to mention is that I have provided for you an update to the corporate annual complaints report 21-22, which includes some amended figures which relate to the Chief Executive Inquiry. And those amendments start on page 5, I think, through to 7. They are highlighted in the amended version. The reason for this is that some of these complaints were recorded off our case management recording system and were discovered after finalisation of that report. So these have now been included in those figures and republished for you. We've also, as I mentioned, alluded to earlier, we've attended the Performance and Delivery Board, and at that meeting, the Senior Leadership Board approved two things, which is the Service Improvement Plan, of which I'll go into next, which is Appendix 2, and also they approved, in support of that, a change to the sign-off process for formal complaints. And just to explain that briefly, currently, executive directors will formally sign off ombudsman complaints, and sometimes that causes a blockage in the timeliness of responses. And also, executive directors aren't actually as close to those as they might be as directors. So what we've proposed is that directors sign those off and are more accountable for what they're signing off, to ensure that any learnings are recorded within our system, and also to ensure that there are implementations of those learnings within their service areas. So that was warmly welcomed, and that is going to be adopted before the end of March this year. There has been a number of significant organisational changes within portfolios, etc. So that's been done in connection with that. Moving on, we have finalised our 22-23 Q3 corporate complaints performance results, and I've provided a snapshot in this presentation because the last time we attended, the annual reports have been quite late coming to you. So we thought that we'd give you a snapshot now, and then you'll see the Q4 results very soon, at least by June of this year. We've also attended various SMT senior management team meetings and held meetings with our partners, Amy and Veolia, because once again in the last meeting it was noted that our partner information was minimal, and we wanted to really see what was happening, because they actually have the greatest number of complaints that we receive. And that has been positive. I must say, Amy have been very supportive and have already provided a wealth of information which we'll be able to include in this year's reports. To support officers within the organisation, and it must be said that most officers do attempt to do their best in responding to complaints, but we have found that there has been really a significant step change. We do feel that the culture is changing, that directors are being more accountable, and officers are realising that they must contact and speak to customers and be personable to them, and that's what we're trying to support them with. Often they are doing that, but they don't tell us that they're doing that by recording that on the system. So what we've had a lot of feedback about the system itself, and therefore we're in the process actually of doing a full system review and process review to make it easier and more accommodating to its users. What we're actually implementing is a number of mandatory fields so that it makes it more easier for use of officers. And following that systems review, we will commence a full training plan for responding officers and also our administrative staff who administer that system. So just before I go on to the service improvement plan in a little bit more detail, this is the snapshot of the Q3 to date results. On the next slide, please. I'm sorry if it's a bit small, but I'll just give you the headlines. Regarding Ombudsman, Q3 to date, we've had 65 Ombudsman inquiries, and the highest numbers relate to housing and neighbourhoods, 15%, Sendars 11%, and Streets Ahead 11%. And from an outcome perspective, of those 65 complaints that we've dealt with, 12 were upheld, which relate to maladministration or injustice, and one report as well for the same things. As regards learning and remedies, again, this is poorly recorded, and this is something that's addressed in the improvement plan. So of all of the 1,800 cases that we had in Q3, for example, there were at least 117 which we could have recorded learnings from, and that's because we discount complaints that were withdrawn, what we call problem-solving complaints, quick quickly resolved complaints within 3 days, and also any that have been inaccurately recorded, which is also an issue. So of those 117, there were only 36 remedies recorded against them. And actually, at a minimum, you'd expect at least, let's say, 117, because we could have just said sorry as an apology. So we would expect a lot more. Obviously, these that are recorded here, 33 related to service improvements, 1 related to a financial remedy and compensation payment, and 2 related to a refund. So this is an area that's a real focus for us in the service improvement plan, which I'll come on to. And the third aspect is surveys. We started in July of last year sending out surveys to customers about how they felt about going through our complaints process, not about the outcome, just about how they felt that they were supported. Of the 273 surveys sent out, for example, in this quarter, only 23% responded, and of that 23%, 30% declared that they had a disability. Unfortunately, the majority of responses say that their overall satisfaction of that process was poor. So something's not right, and often it's down to personal contacts and giving regular updates that customers are seeking. The officers would say, or officers just aren't doing that. So we've got a big gap to fill, but this is something that's also included in our service improvement plan. On the next slide, it just outlines really a baseline position as at Q3 for where we are now in the key performance indicators. So just to highlight some of them, here it lists the 3 major complaint reciprocants of being repairs and maintenance, no surprises, customer services, again, no surprises, and finance. But can I just say that these 3 areas are the ones that actually use the system well. So although they show on our reports as the most recipients, it's because they are actively recording complaints. I am sure that there are other areas within the council that aren't using our system as well, and if they did, they probably show on this report. So that's something else we need to really we're driving the message home. In this quarter, as I said, there was 1,800 approximately complaints received. And then the KPIs there for problem solving, which is complaints which we seek to resolve at the first point of contact within 3 days. Our target is 75%, we're at 55%. And investigations, which we have a 28 days or 28 calendar days, 20 working days in which to fulfil, our target is 80%. We're actually at 81%. If I was to take you back, and you'll see it in the annual report that is to follow, there has been a significant step change in that area in improvement, and I hope you'll continue to see that. And then for investigation reviews, we're not doing as great. Against that target of 80%, we're only at 33%. We do, as part of our system review that we're currently in process of, we have found that there might be some miscalculation in this area, so that's been re-examined as part of the review, and I'll be able to update you further as regards, I'm having that rechecked, this 33%, because of something I noticed only last week, so I will update you in the annual report about that actual figure for investigation reviews. But can I just say, I am aware that we are taking longer than we should in getting back to citizens about this. Our quality assurance, though, is good. We have had hundreds of officers have responded to our core training in 2022, and that's where we really teach them about customer contact and responding positively and comprehensively to citizens, and you see that in the figures, that usually the responses go out well, they're comprehensive, and they're hitting our target of 85%. Escalations actually means the number of closed investigations, those closed investigations going on to investigation reviews, and that's pretty low at 2%, so we're tracking that as well. So in the annual report that will follow, and obviously we'll be back to talk about that hopefully we can show you the full year effect and how we are achieving or improving these targets, which really is helping our customers have a better experience. That's the real aim, because people will always complain, but we want them to feel as though we're listening and that we're changing, if we need to, our services to ensure that they are supported through that process. So the service plan that is in Appendix 2, on the next slide, I have just bulleted really the priorities of that plan and what's happening. So the first thing on there is the systems. So on the plan, just to be clear, the recommendations that were made by this committee, I've tried to align each of the recommendations to those objectives on the plan. And the priorities, therefore, are to get the system as easy as possible for officers to use, so there's no excuses. And we're embedding mandatory fields to make sure, for example, that learning is always recorded at the closure of a complaint. They won't be able to close a complaint without recording the learning, because there's always something. And we're also trying to encourage the use of the system so that people aren't keeping complaints in spreadsheets, but they're using the one system, so we get a holistic view of what's happening across the organisation. And the quality of recording is important to us, because at the moment there are a number of errors, let's say, or unfulfilled fields, which means, as you know, bad quality in, bad quality out. It affects the reporting, and we want that to be really quality so that we can make real analysis from that. And for officers, we're improving our reporting system. I'm not technical, but Power BI is everywhere. It's going on to there so that we can quickly give officers detailed analysis of their service areas teams, so that they can address themes within their portfolios, and also understand and look at things that are outstanding beyond the target dates. We are wanting officers to really record learnings, because we've promised to you by March 2024 a learnings dashboard. Apologise for that. Learnings dashboard, but we can't develop it because there's no data there for it to be developed with. So until they record that, but what we see it is a web page. Sorry. Oh, is that okay? Sorry. So that internally and externally we can show people what's gone wrong, but what we've put right, and how our organisation is continuously improving based on feedback coming direct from our citizens. So we're really eager. So the first point is to get officers recording that learning. We also have a lot to do on surveys. So as I said, we are sending surveys out, but they're only going out by email and text at the moment. We want to introduce a telephone, because I think that's, again, talking to somebody is probably the best way to get their feedback. And obviously people with protected characteristics, one of the things we really want to do from April is to deep dive into services where people with protected characteristics are being affected. So, for example, within our service, blue badges is often a complaint area. But why? What is that customer journey, and what are they complaining about? We want to actually stand in their shoes, look at the complaint, and understand what we might need to change, perhaps a policy or something, just to make their life easier, should it warrant it. So that is something. We don't just want to be collecting a survey for survey's sake, and at the moment perhaps we are, but we're committed from April we'll have the capacity to deep dive into areas, especially our own, to make sure those changes are implemented if needed. And so there comes in the quality monitoring that's really difficult to get sometimes and understand, but at least people are telling us when they have a protected characteristic. So we just want to use that information a bit more to make it meaningful for our citizens, and again to report on the work that we identify. And finally, I've put on this about our partners. They have really responded well to us going out to them. We're meeting with them quarterly now and making sure we get that data so we will be able to incorporate it in our next report. And then, Chair, are just our recommendations on the next slide. And any questions, please?
Okay, thank you. And Simon.
Thank you, Colleen. I've been on this committee for a long time, and Paul knows I've given him quite a hard time sometimes. But can I say this is the first time that we've had this kind of feedback and like a plan. So it really helps because it gives us like a clear like direction of where we're going. So that is really fantastic to see. And obviously, once we can deal with what's behind why people are complaining, hopefully capturing the data, the journey, how we address the complaints, that is super important. But as I say often, we also have to look at why people are complaining, because most of the time people are complaining because the service is not good enough, and that's got nothing to do with you in customer service. It's the other departments, and we say this all the time. So we've got to do both things, and I think it's really good to hear that you're looking at how to capture those surveys and those opinions using different methods, because we often focus a lot on online and electronic kind of capture, and I think any occasions where we are out in communities, we have to have a way of collecting people opinions of things. So for example, I don't want to put too much on the lax, but we are, you know, we as council go into communities and often there's officers there. So why don't we try to capture some very quick kind of, and then give information? Is one of the things that, because we're such a big organisation, we don't talk to each other very much, and often we have the information, it's just not passed on to the right people. So, but thank you very much. It's really good to see the progress, finally.
It's probably worth mentioning, actually, that because there's a lot of unhappiness we're asking people about the complaints process, and there appears to be a lot of unhappiness, but it's that usual thing that people are unhappy with the outcome, they're unhappy with the service they've received, and so that translates into how they perceive the process, and that's always a challenge in terms of actually, was the way your complaint dealt with satisfactory, and people still think, well, no, because I wasn't happy with that I had to make the complaint in the first place.
Okay, thank you. Tom.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much. I really do echo what Councillor Agenzi has said, that this is really welcome, and it's clear that in between our meeting in November when you came and today, an awful lot of work has gone on to get us to this point where there's an improvement plan sitting in front of us, and it's good to hear that there's been the recommendations from the November meeting have had a positive impact. So thank you, because these things don't happen overnight, so it's much appreciated. I'll make a few comments and then a couple of questions. I think the title of the plan, an improvement plan, is right. It's not a plan just to improve our complaint service, it's an improvement plan, and the Q3 figures that you ran through do show that there is still quite a lot to improve on. So I think this committee is still going to be keeping a close interest in this and encouraging you to kind of keep on going in the direction that is going. A couple of questions though. I think the complaints sign off from directors to make directors more accountable makes a lot of sense. What is the role now for executive directors and having oversight of director signed off complaints? It would be, I'm sure they aren't cut out of the process, but perhaps you could just say how they're going to maintain an interest in it. And then the other question I had was, what's the relationship with between this improvement plan and the Performance and Delivery Board and this committee? Perhaps you could just explain those relationships. And then the last comment is on the recommendations. Yes, I think I speak for myself in saying you have our continued support as a critical friend who wants to kind of push you and keep on doing, encouraging the good signs that are clearly already in process.
Thank you. Yeah, so to address, yeah, it's definitely an improvement plan. And I think I just wanted to say that as a complaints team, we're on it. We know the areas that are problematic and will naturally create more complaints, repairs, housing, those sort of areas. But they're the places that matter to citizens, and we're passionate to make sure that those officers are responsive and there's not complacency, if you like, in those areas too. So as a team, we're all over it because we're aware of what matters most, because we get that feedback to citizens, and we're committed to make sure that officers are accountable. And that moves on to the sign-off by directors. Our executive directors are definitely in the loop, and as part of the Performance and Delivery Board, they're present when we discuss and report back on these quarterly figures, and especially regarding the detail of the Ombudsman and formal complaints. So we attend their SMTs, SLBs, and all these acronyms, sorry, Senior Leadership Boards, Performance and Delivery Boards, because there they are present when we present the detail and the pain, let's say, that customers have, our citizens have, and what we're going to do to put it right. As a team, we also provide regular reports to our executive directors so that they can see at a glance how many, let's say, serious complaints to less serious complaints are within their portfolio, who is accountable for responding within what time frame, and if they're late, then it's down to them to make sure that they give them a nudge. So we nudge the executive directors through our reporting, and they nudge, let's say, downwards. It's just, we've just found that if directors sign off, it expedites the final response. It's not just sat in an in tray, because the executive directors are very busy people, and they're not as close to the detail either, as much as their line managers below. So that's the relationship, but definitely they are overall accountable for what happens in their portfolio, and we will keep them accountable.
I think I just want to echo Corley's thanks to this committee, really, because it really created some momentum that you noted the report, but said actually all of these things need some work, and that's created that sort of ripple effect, and it's gone through that system, and you can see the real difference that's been made. But it was the noise from here really helped us. I mean, we said last time what we're trying to do is change the whole culture of the organisation to how we deal with complaints, and that, as I said when I came in November, that's starting to happen. But actually the push that came from here has really sort of moved things along. So thanks to this committee really for that.
And, oh sorry, I was just going to say the Performance and Delivery Board members, which are the Senior Leadership Board, have really responded positively, and having your backing and theirs, we can feel the ripple effects, because now officers are responding in asking for training. How do I use the system? What should I be doing? So there's noise now about making things better. We can only see, so we really can see a shift in the culture, and now we just need to support that activity, which is why we're doing the system changes, to make sure that there's no excuses, let's say, to make sure that we get the data we need so that we can present that learnings dashboard. That's going to be of interest to you, organisationally, and to our citizens too.
Yeah, that's the other key change we mentioned last time about we'll be able to report much more quickly now that we've moved on to the new system. And as you've already seen, we've already got the quarter threes. So it's not like there's going to be that time lag of 7-8 months before this committee sees what's happened with complaints in the previous financial year. So that will really make a change as well.
Okay, well, thank you for your thanks, and it's appreciated. Simon.
Thank you very much, and obviously I'll echo my colleagues. Thanks for a great report in terms of where you've taken it and we've taken it. So thank you for that, and obviously also in all of the work you and your team do up at the sharp end of the council, and we know these complaints. They're not complaining about the customer services in general. They're complaining about the rest. So I say with a great upbeat kind of presentation, I did I did notice that at one point, you know, it did seem that the flying element was almost. You said, you know, you're getting these from the areas that are actually cooperating with the complaints, and I think, you know, that's probably, you know, the takeaway I did. That's where, you know, the work's needed to make sure that that we are getting, you know, everyone is cooperating, so that we're getting all the data on all the complaints. But again, thank you very much.
And again, that's the difference. There's so much more visibility now around how people are performing, and that's delivered quickly and it's reported on quickly. And so it's, you know, if services aren't really cooperating, there's less places to hide. Yeah.
Okay, Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll echo what my colleagues have just said anyway. I think it's a great report. It really is. And I like I know Dave is listening. It's nice to see where we've got staff just nudging the directors a little bit, you know, to say this has come from committee, what we're going to do about it. So that's reassuring. That's from my end anyway. It's just blue badges. You know, you must get I mean, I've had loads of complaints myself, and I just want to see if you're going to do this. I know you are, but I'm going to have to say, you know, when you were just going on earlier saying about the complaints procedure and the staff, training all the staff up and everything. It's not a very nice job, it can't be, when you're getting people who's frustrated on the end of the phone. So when you get that complaint come in, before we get them complaints coming in, you might not got the staff to do this, but do you do a percentage of what comes in that particular day, those calls, because they'll get recorded? And I just wondered if some member of your team takes a percentage each day and just listens to what the actual customer's saying and what your staff member's saying back to them. You're nodding, so I know it's going to be a yes.
Yeah, well, I want to answer honestly. The staff that takes the call, because obviously it comes in various versions. If it's over the telephone within our call centre, we monitor that quite closely. And actually, the suggestion would be that we look at complaint calls in a silo, because we look at all our calls and really monitor what our quality is. Usually, obviously, when somebody's complaining, they need to have a caring person on the end, and I'd like to say that our staff are that. But as we mentioned here, it's usually about a service that's been unfulfilled or not done properly or totally ignored. So from experience, it usually isn't at that point a call. What really needs investigating is why has it got wrong, and that's where we're liaising with our key areas. As I mentioned, housing, repairs, wherever, Veolia, streets ahead. It's really understanding what went wrong, and it's really that deep dive, blue badges, what goes wrong, and what have we done in response to negate a customer having to feel that they need to complain. So I feel that more of now we can get out of the kind of projecty side. I really want my team to look into the deep diving, you know, what is going wrong and what do we need to change? What is the learning? It's all about learning, so that we can, you know, if somebody complains and we change something that's for the better of others, surely that's got to be positive, and our citizens will see that if we publish it. So we really can get something out of this. As we said, we want to be more caring and listening organisation and enhance our reputation as such. So that's where we want to shift really into deep diving into what those complaints are and why they happened, so we can stop it happening.
I mean, in terms of blue badge complaints, I mean, they have taken off, because obviously now people can apply for a blue badge with hidden disabilities, and that causes quite a lot of complications in terms of it's not immediately obvious that somebody will qualify. We then have to get a medical assessment done. There's quite a backlog in terms of getting the medical assessment. So there's a lot within that system that could incline people to complain, and sometimes it's just about delays, or because their badge is expired, people don't realise they can still park on it. There's a grace period. Again, people don't appreciate that. So there's an awful lot of stuff within the blue badge process which lends itself to people complaining. But yeah, I mean, we try and stay on top of it and try and monitor it as best we can.
Okay, thank you very much, and that's very positive, and it's what's happened since November and the recommendations. It's very heartening that, you know, clearly we've been listened to, and the action plan is actually aligned directly with each of our recommendations, and we, you know, appreciate that as well. So the recommendations here are to approve the corporate complaints improvement plan for the period November 22nd to March 24. Biannual attendance at this committee meeting to discuss performance against the improvement plan, and this will include our partners' performance as agreed against KPIs, and continued support of the committee to ensure prioritisation, accountability and responsiveness of complaints procedure. Agreed? And yeah, I can assure you that this committee will continue to support you in the endeavours you're making on behalf of the council, because, you know, what we really want is to get it right first time, and if this improvement plan and learning experience helps us to get it right first time, that's in everybody's interest. Thank you. Right, moving on then to item 10 on the agenda, which is the Housing Management System Audit Update. Now, Robert, do you want to come to the table, as it were, please? Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Chair and committee members. This report is really an update and information report, and it's seeking to update you on the activity relating to the audit action, which was closed in June of last year on the replacement housing management system. Members of the committee will be aware that that's in the process now of being built, configured and tested. So the report's setting out activity that's falling under the Housing Policy Committee by way of updates. The Housing Policy Committee is the supervisory committee for this delivery phase. The report refers to updates that have been provided to that committee. It's to add to the text of the report, which talks about a knowledge briefing being provided in March. I'm now told that actually that will be a full report and presentation to the committee in March. Around the progress and implementation and how that's going, how effective that is. Importantly for the future work of this committee, the internal auditor has advised that this project will be audited in the next municipal year. It's falling within the next municipal year's audit plan, and in line with practice. Where the audit finds that there is no assurance or is a limited assurance with high organisational impact, it will be reported into the committee. So a brief report, it's designed to describe to the committee the activity elsewhere in the authority and before the Housing Policy Committee overseeing delivery, and also to advise around the future audit activity that the auditor is going to be undertaking in relation to this project. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, questions and comments? Simon, is that you?
Thank you for that. Obviously, it doesn't give us any information. And I think obviously it's I suppose it's the point about, for me, it's what this committee's for, so it's not going to be a question to you, I don't think. In terms of, it's interesting, I did some SIPFA training yesterday, and we talked about the audit committee position statement. The audit committee should be established so that it's independent of executive decision making and able to provide objective oversight. It also says the committee should, in local authorities, be independent both the executive and scrutiny functions. And before we've been told that we're not here to scrutinise. I think that says from SIPFA that's exactly what audit committees are here to do. Whatever however the council is constituted, we're here to ask questions. It also goes on to say, have rights to request reports and seek assurances from relevant officers. So, you know, I don't think, you know, we're especially asking anything that's unique or special that, you know, that any audit committee shouldn't be asking. It's a good thing that we are asking these questions because, you know, we shouldn't just be consuming the reports that we're given. We should be asking questions that need to be asked. So thank you for this. We look forward to the work of Audit and the report that we're going to get next. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments on this? Okay, the recommendations are to note the contents of this report and the reporting and performance oversight activity under the Housing Policy Committee in relation to the housing management system. And perhaps I'll just note that I have had conversations with the Deputy Chair of that committee to seek assurances on the fact that they're actively engaging with this. And then B, note the internal auditor will conduct an audit of the housing management system, and where the audit finds that there is no assurance or a limited assurance with high organisational impact, it will form the basis of a report to this committee. And I'm looking at Linda to nod at that point, and which she does. Thank you. So can we agree those recommendations? Thank you. And that concludes the item 10, and item 11, the final item on the agenda, is the work programme. We've already discussed what the major item of the work programme will be in March. Sorry, I'm just getting the papers to the right place. So in March we've got the statement of the accounts and then report of those charged with governance, an update on the governance issues outlined in the annual governance statement, whistleblowing policy review, community schools update, and then the standard item, the work programme. Is there anything else people want to say about the work programme coming up? I think it's almost become traditional that the April programme will review in March whether we need to go ahead with that and whether those items on it which are compliance to international auditing standards and the internal audit plan, whether they need to be covered at that meeting or a subsequent one because it lies within the, you know, local election period, which might be awkward, but we can make that decision in at the March meeting. And I've asked officers to consider whether they need to be taken, those reports to which I've just referred. So are there comments on this? Yes, David.
Just reviewing that and having had the quarterly whistleblowing meeting with Elise and Audit, I know she's looking to update the whistleblowing policy review. I'm not 100% certain she knew it was coming in the 9th of March and whether it'll be ready. So I'll double check the timing, but if not, I think we can definitely get it for April.
Tom. Oh, sorry, it's Linda. Linda, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to give you an update as well. I've spoken to the Director of Children's Services about the community schools update, and he's just requested that could be pushed back another month because he wants to give an accurate and reflective update. At the minute, he doesn't think he's in that position to bring it to the 9th of March.
Angela, sorry.
It looks like we're going to have the meeting in April.
We will see. Yeah. Okay then. Thank you for those comments. So we know what we're doing in March, and we'll decide in March what we're doing in April. I think that's the outcome of that discussion. All right. And final item on the agenda is just the date of the next meeting, which as we've just keep referring to is 9th of March at 5 o'clock in this chamber. So thank you for your attendance at this, and good night.